Today we're going to look at two very cool Seiko dive watches. The Seiko SRP313 Monster 2nd generation and the Seiko Prospex SRP637, also known as the Baby Tuna. Now essentially these two watches are the same. They both run the in-house movement by Seiko, the 4R36 automatic movement, which ticks at 21,600 beats per hour, or 3 Hz. It's a 24 jewel movement, which is hand wound and can be hacked. The movement has a power reserve of 41 hours. The main difference between the two watches is the Tuna has a shroud and the Monster is a little bit smaller, but essentially it's the same. The two watches do have a very different appearance. The Monster is 47mm in diameter, which includes a crown, and is 12mm in depth, and it weighs 184 grams. The Tuna is 50mm in diameter, including the crown, and is 200 grams in weight, and comes with the shroud. Now the shroud is held in by 3 screws. As you can see, there's here and the 2 here. Now if you were to take the shroud off the Tuna, you can see it looks almost identical to the Monster. Both watches have a 120 click uni-directional bezel. Once locked into position, they have no movement whatsoever, especially on the Monster. The problem I found with the Monster is the side corners are very sharp, and you can sometimes nip your fingers when turning the bezel, so you have to be very careful. It's very easy to turn with these little indentations. You can simply put your fingers inside and it turns very easy. Now, in contrast, the Monster has a very good bezel. The Tuna, although looks very good, is much harder to turn. Because the shroud covers half the bezel and it has these serrated edges for you to grip, they're not that good. You have to actually place your fingers almost on top of the bezel and then turn it. And you can see my finger is slipping. Now, one of the problems I had, which is a major problem considering this is a dive watch, I took the watch when I went swimming, and when I got out of the pool, I turned the bezel because I was going into the steam room to have a steam, and I wanted to time how long I was going to stay in there. And it was virtually impossible for me to turn the bezel when the watch was wet and my fingers were wet. And as you can see, I'm having some difficulty already turning it, and the watch is completely dry. What I had to do is actually get my nail inside and then turn it. And it was not the easiest thing to do. So that's one thing you need to look at. Now in one of my other videos I did say I'm not quite sure what the reason for the shroud is. Is it more of a gimmick? And quite a few people, well, one person in particular, took great offense to this and told me that it's a must-have on a dive watch to protect it from any knocks and scratches. I did say to him, well, maybe that's true, but at what speed are you going when you're diving that you're going to damage your watch with such force? It needs to have such a strong shroud. So personally I think it's more of a gimmick. It does make the watch look really good. I like the fact that it's got the shroud, and that's one of the reasons I bought it. I think the watch looks very cool. So whether or not it is a gimmick, possibly some other divers can tell me if they've used it and found it useful. Or if some other people have found it really difficult like I did to turn the bezel. Now the shroud is held in by 3 screws. You've got one here and 2 on the side, so you can take the shroud off if you wanted to. I personally wouldn't want to take it off, but some people have, and as you can see in the picture I posted earlier, some people have. Looking at the watches next to each other, you can see the difference in the size of the bezel. The bezel on the Monster is 6mm and the Tuna is 5mm. I'm not quite sure what the reason they did that, but the dial is actually 29mm on the Monster and 30mm in the Tuna. I would have preferred to have a larger dial on the Monster and had a smaller bezel, but for some reason they chose to do it a little bit smaller. The biggest difference between the two watches, I think, is the actual dial. You can see on the Monster you have these serrated tooth mark hour indicators, and you have the minute markers which come a lot further into the dial than the Tuna. Personally, I'm not a fan of the way the markers come out. It makes the dial look even smaller than what it actually is. The dial is very clean and uncluttered. You can see on the Tuna you've got rectangle indicators. This was the same sort of indicators used in the Monster first generation, and you will also see that it has the minute markers in surrounding the dial: 5, 10, 20, 25, etc. Again, I'm not a big fan of this. I don't think it's necessary. I much prefer a dial to be as minimal as possible. Both have the Seiko branding on the top, and then underneath you have on the Tuna the Prospex logo, and it says automatic, divers 200 meters, and on the Monster you don't have the Prospex logo. Obviously it's not in the Prospex line. Automatic diver and 200 meters. The date window on both watches are in the same position. However, the Monster has a black background, which does make it a lot harder to read than the Tuna. The Tuna, you simply look at it and you can see the date much clearer, and you don't have to look too hard into it. With the Monster, it's a fraction of a second longer just to make out what the date is, and it has the border around the date window. Again, personally, I don't like the border, and I would have preferred it to have a white background similar to that of the Tuna. Seiko's Lumibrite luminous material is used on both watches. As you can see, they glow really brightly. This is when it's been at full charge, and throughout the night it will just fade down to a nice bluey green tint. Seiko are quite well known for their luminous material, and I think this is probably one of the best luminous I've in any watch that I've owned. I think more and more watches are using similar luminous now. On both watches, the hour indicators have a silver border where the light can catch it and reflect quite nicely. Personally, I'm not a big fan of this border. I would have preferred just to have the Lumibrite material and not have the border around the edges, but that again is my personal preference. Sitting on top of the bezel is Seiko's proprietary mineral glass called Hardlex. I think it makes sense having this on the watch in the contents of the watch and the price point. I've had no problems with Hardlex in my experience, so I think it's really good to have it on the watch, and I have no reservations about having it on there. Both watches come with drill lugs. I'm a big fan of drill lugs. It makes putting a new strap on so easy, and also when changing straps you don't have to hack away at the back of the watch to try and get the pins out. One of my problems I did have when choosing a strap, and I did point this out in another video, was that the pins in all Seiko watches are very thick, and you can sometimes have problems when trying to find straps for the watches. So that's an issue you might want to look at when you are choosing a strap. The strap I use on the Monster, I've had to actually use different pins than the Seiko ones because the Seiko ones just wouldn't fit. So that's something you need to be aware of if you want to use the Seiko pins in the straps. Flipping the watches over, both watches have a screw down back case with the Tsunami logo dead center. One thing I did find interesting is on the back it says air diver on both watches, which I found quite strange. Considering these are dive watches, why they would have the name Air Diver on the back case. Now, the Prospex line does have 3 designations: air, sea and land. So why they chose to put air on both watches is a bit curious. Perhaps somebody could comment below and give the reason why they've done that if they know. I do prefer the crown on the Monster. It has this textured finish to it which helps you grip it very securely. The crown guards are also not in the way of unscrewing it and screwing it in. Compare that with the crown on the Tuna. It's much harder to get hold of. Because the shroud comes in the way, you have to get hold of it really tightly to unscrew it, and your finger can't really get into it. You're only touching the top part. So at the bottom it's more open, so you're using the bottom part to unscrew it, which when the crown is tight it's hard to open. And also when you want to close it, you want to make sure you close it properly. You don't want to be going into any water with the crown half open. The watches come on this stainless steel brushed and polished bracelet. The only difference between the two is the lug size. On the Monster it's 20mm and on the Tuna they come in 22. The bracelet is very well made, I have to say. The lugs are quite thick and strong. It comes with pins and not screws, but I think at this price point it's to be expected. The thing that lets the bracelet down is the actual buckle. It's very tinny, but I think everyone knows now that the buckles are quite poor. It's on stainless steel, and it does have a diver's extension. One thing Seiko has become quite notorious about is the misalignment of the chapter ring. As you can see, there's a slight misalignment here. If I hadn't had looked at it, I wouldn't have noticed. But I think there's a lot of Seikos that have this misalignment. You can see here on the Monster there's a slight misalignment to the right. On the Monster there's a slight misalignment to the left. Now this is not really a big issue for me. It's quite minimal, but this is not all Seiko watches. There are some which have got no misalignment whatsoever. But if this is an issue for you, you might want to look at that before you purchase the watch. I think the overall finish on both watches is excellent. This kind of finish you would find on much higher end watches, which would cost you 4, maybe 5 times the price of the Seiko watches. So they've done a really good job. I can't fault anything wrong with the watches. The only problem would be the chapter ring, but that again, that's not a really big issue for me. But in terms of the case finish, it's fantastic. The screw down back is solid. The screws at the side here for the Tuna are really well screwed in. There's no wobble anywhere else in the crown, and even the bezel. There's no major play. This one has a little bit, but I've used watches which have cost me 3 times the price of this, and in terms of quality, I can't really fault Seiko at all. On wrist, both watches are very comfortable. I think one of the reasons is because the lungs are so short, the watches look a lot smaller than what they actually are, and they feel a lot smaller than what they actually are. The Monster is 47mm in diameter, and the Tuna is 50mm in diameter. When I was looking at the Tuna, that was a concern that the watch is going to be too big on my wrist, but after putting it on, and because the lungs are so short, I think it fits quite well. Another thing I like about both watches is that the crown is at the 4 o'clock position and not the 3 o'clock like most watches. This allows me to wear the watch very close to the bottom of my wrist, which won't dig into the top of the wrist. So overall, I'm really happy with both watches. I did buy the Monster about a month before I bought the Tuna. I didn't really look at the Tuna beforehand. On the pictures, the Tuna just doesn't look such an appealing watch. But I think if anybody wants to buy one, the pictures don't do it justice. You must go into a showroom and try it on. It looks a lot better in person than it actually is. So when I did get the Tuna, I considered selling the Monster because the watches are so similar. But after wearing them for some time, both watches do have a slightly different character. Not just because of the dial layout. They do feel a little bit different. The Monster is a bit smaller. So I've decided to keep both watches. One thing that does sort of confuse me a bit is the price of the watches. Now, the Monster cost me £189, which is $265, and the Tuna was £321, which is $450. So that's a price difference of £132, which is about $185. Now, essentially, you're just paying the extra £132 for the Shroud. Now, for that money, you could actually buy another watch. You could probably pick up, you couldn't quite pick up an SKX, but you could pick up a Seiko 5. So you could buy two watches for the price of the one Tuna. So some people are saying that the Tuna is overpriced. I'm not too sure. I think in actual fact the Monster is underpriced. Now, if you consider what you're getting a 200-meter water-resistant dive watch, really good build quality, and I don't think you can buy anything for the same price with this type of quality. And there are other watches out there, but most of them are going to be like 100 meters water resistant. So I'm not sure if it's underpriced. Now, Seiko have had this trend by upgrading their watches by simply putting the Prospex logo on the dial, and then justifying the higher price of the watches. So could they do this with the Monster? Simply by placing the Prospex logo on there and upgrading it to the Prospex line and increasing the price by another £50 or $75. I don't know, perhaps they could. I think they could probably get away with that price as well, because it would still be great value watch. So I think if anyone is considering buying a Monster, it could be a time to get one just in case they do decide to do that. The Bezel watch fair is coming up in 2 months' time, and usually watch companies tend to increase their prices right after the fair. And I've already heard that Rolex are going to increase their prices by 3%. And where Rolex go, others follow. Normally Omega will do the same. They'll increase their prices. So I think anyone considering buying a watch now would be a good time, but just before anyone starts raising their prices. So that concludes the watch review. Thank you for watching.